It was a quiet evening in the city, the kind where the sky transitions from soft hues of orange to a dusky purple, as the lights of the bustling streets below begin to flicker on. Amidst the chaos of everyday life, a chance encounter would soon change everything. This wasn't your typical story of riches or fame, but a tale of something deeper, something unexpected. Our story begins with Jalan, a young man who didn't have much, but had everything anyone could need in life: courage, heart, and the belief that good things were just around the corner. Growing up in a small neighborhood, he never dreamed of living the luxurious life some people took for granted. To him, a day's work was all he needed, and maybe one day, if luck smiled upon him, things could be different. But fate, it seems, had different plans. On this particular evening, as he made his way through the city, his path crossed with a woman in need. Sophie, a stunningly beautiful and confident woman, but one who wasn't as invincible as she appeared. Sophie was the girlfriend of Alexander Westbrook, a self-made millionaire whose empire spanned industries far and wide. She was used to a life of luxury, fine dining, designer clothes, and the kind of attention that only wealth and status could afford. But, in a twist of fate, that night was the night everything changed for her. Jalan, seeing Sophie in a vulnerable state, couldn't ignore the distress that radiated from her. The night had gone wrong in ways no one could have anticipated. A dangerous situation had unfolded right before Sophie's eyes, and in a split second, her world was turned upside down. Jalan didn't hesitate for a second. Without a second thought, he rushed into action. In a chaotic moment that would have left anyone frozen with fear, Jalan's quick thinking and fearless actions saved Sophie from what could have been a disastrous situation. But as Sophie stared into the eyes of the stranger who had just saved her, she couldn't help but wonder. Why had he risked everything for someone he didn't even know? Jalan, on the other hand, had no doubt about what he did. He hadn't thought of the consequences. He just acted. That was who he was, someone who stood up when it mattered, even if it meant putting himself in harm's way. As they made their way through the streets, Jalan noticed Sophie's disbelief, her questions about why he had stepped in. She wasn't used to people acting out of pure kindness, not when there was nothing to gain from it. Jalan didn't have the answers, only the simple truth. He was just doing what felt right. Sophie felt a mix of gratitude and confusion, unable to wrap her mind around the strange twist of fate that had brought them together. The next day, as the sun rose on a new chapter, Sophie found herself deep in thought about the previous night's events. She had tried to push it aside, but the memory of Jalan's selflessness haunted her. And little did she know, Alexander Westbrook, her wealthy boyfriend, would soon take an interest in the man who had saved her life. Alexander had always been a man of power and influence. He was used to controlling situations and getting what he wanted. But this time, something about the situation nagged at him. Who was this Jalan? Why was he so different from the people he was used to dealing with? And what was it about Sophie's story that kept him up late at night, thinking? Determined to learn more, Alexander summoned Jalan. He knew this wasn't just a chance encounter. There was something more to the story, something he couldn't quite place. With millions at his disposal, Alexander had the power to reward or punish as he saw fit. But for some reason, this was different. He wasn't sure if he admired Jalan or saw him as a potential threat to the life he had built. One thing was clear, though: Jalan was no ordinary person. As the meeting approached, Jalan had no idea what to expect. He had done nothing more than help someone in need, yet now he found himself standing at the center of a storm. Sophie, unsure of how to explain the night's events to Alexander, could only wonder what her boyfriend's reaction would be. Would he understand, or would he see Jalan as a complication? Jalan sat nervously, unsure of what he was about to walk into. The weight of the unknown hung heavy in the air as the door opened, revealing Alexander Westbrook in all his imposing presence. The moment they locked eyes, there was an unspoken tension, an electricity in the room that neither could ignore. Without wasting any time, Alexander wasted no words. He knew Jalen was no ordinary man, and whatever had transpired between him and Sophie the night before had changed things in a way neither of them could have foreseen. "I think you deserve to be rewarded," Alexander said, his voice calm, but carrying an underlying force. "But not in the way you might think." Jalen was taken aback. He wasn't used to being handed rewards for doing what he thought was just the right thing. But what happened next would be more than he could have ever imagined. Alexander extended an offer that would change Jalen's life forever. A reward so grand, so unimaginable, it would set the stage for a new chapter in Jalen's life. $10 million. But why? Why would a millionaire like Alexander offer such an amount to a complete stranger, especially one who wasn't seeking anything? Was this truly a gift, or was there something hidden beneath the surface? Sophie watched with wide eyes, unsure of how this would all unfold. And just as the weight of the moment seemed to settle, the offer came with one condition. A condition that would change everything Jalen thought he knew about himself, Sophie, and the world they lived in. What was the true reason behind Alexander's offer? What lay ahead for Jalen and Sophie, and how would their lives intertwine in the days to come? The tension in the room was palpable. Jalen stood frozen, the weight of the decision hanging over him. His life, which had seemed so simple just hours ago, had suddenly spiraled into something far more complicated. Would he accept the money and the power that came with it? Or would he turn it down, staying true to the life he had known? The choice was his, and the clock was ticking. The door creaked shut behind David with an eerie finality, and the group fell into a heady silence. Sarah's heart raced as she glanced over at Lena, whose expression had gone pale. Mark stood stiff, his hands clenched into fists by his sides, ready for anything. There was something in the air, an unspoken understanding that this wasn't just another close call. It felt like the moment that would determine everything, whether they would continue running, whether they would face the past, or whether they would be swallowed up by the darkness that had been following them all along. Outside, the wind howled even louder, pushing against the cabin's walls like a living thing, eager to break through. The shadows in the corners of the room seemed to grow longer, stretching across the floor, dark and unsettling. Sarah felt a cold sweat trickle down her spine as she turned toward David, who had stepped back from the door. "You don't have to do this," Sarah said, her voice unsteady, as though the words themselves might betray her. David didn't respond at first, his eyes fixed on the door. The others were waiting for him to make a decision, but Sarah could see the strain in his face. He had always been their leader, the one they trusted to keep them together. But now, even his confidence was wavering. The knock at the door was not just an interruption. It was a reminder of everything they had done. A reminder that they weren't safe anymore. Not here, not anywhere. David slowly turned to face them. "This has been coming for a long time," he said quietly, his voice heavy with guilt. "We all knew it wouldn't last forever. The question isn't whether they'll come for us. It's what we do when they do." Lena's jaw tightened, her eyes narrowing. "And what do you suggest we do, David? Because so far, all I've seen is running. We can't keep running forever." Her words stung, but there was truth in them. They had been running for months, since the day the files had been stolen, the day their lives had been turned upside down. What had started as a simple mistake had spiraled into a nightmare. They had tried to erase their involvement, to disappear into the background, but the people they had crossed didn't forget easily. Now, they were trapped in a game of cat and mouse, each move bringing them closer to the edge. "We should have never gotten involved," Sarah muttered under her breath, but Lena heard her. Her eyes softened for a brief moment, but only for a moment. "You think I don't know that?" Lena shot back, a bitter edge to her voice. "But we're in this now. All of us, and running away, pretending like we can fix it by hiding in some godforsaken cabin. It's not enough." Mark's voice broke through the tension, low and controlled, though it was clear he was struggling with his own demons. "We don't have a lot of options left. Either we stand and fight, or we run. If we run, we die anyway, just slower. Sarah looked from one face to the next. She saw fear. She saw uncertainty. She saw people who were no longer sure what was right. The weight of it all was unbearable. Her mind flashed back to the day everything had gone wrong. The day they had made that one decision, that one choice, that had set all this in motion. It seemed like a lifetime ago, but the images of that day still haunted her, as fresh as ever. It had all started innocently enough. They had been working for a private tech firm, a company that prided itself on solving the most complex problems for its clients. But when they were tasked with handling sensitive government data, they had stumbled onto something they weren't supposed to see. It was a set of files, carefully hidden, buried within layers of encryption, meant to be lost forever. But when Sarah had accidentally uncovered them, she didn't realize the Pandora's box they were about to open. At first, it seemed harmless. A mistake, maybe, but something that could be swept under the rug. They had all agreed to keep quiet about it. But that had been before they had learned the truth, before they realized that the files weren't just any files. They were a record of covert operations, a blueprint for a global network that threatened to change the balance of power forever. And the moment they had seen what was in those files, they had become a target. From there, everything had unraveled. People who had seemed like allies turned on them. They had tried to cover their tracks, to destroy the evidence, but it was too late. Someone knew. And now, those people were coming for them. Sarah shook her head, trying to clear her thoughts. It was all too much. Too many lies, too many secrets. And now, standing here in this cabin, surrounded by the people who had been with her from the beginning, she didn't know where to go next. The knock at the door had come again, and this time it was louder, more insistent. The others stiffened, every one of them waiting for David to make the call. There was no more time to waste. David walked toward the door again, his steps slow and deliberate. He didn't look back at them this time. His hands trembled, but his face was set in a grim line. The decision had already been made. Whether they liked it or not, they were about to face what had been chasing them all this time. "Whatever happens next," David said quietly, turning to face the group, "stay close. Don't trust anyone." The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Sarah could feel the knot in her stomach tighten. No one could be trusted, not anymore, not with what they knew. As the door creaked open, a rush of cold air swept in, biting at their skin. Standing there, silhouetted in the doorway, was the figure they had all feared. But this time, there was no turning back. They couldn't run anymore. The figure stepped forward into the light, his face hidden beneath a dark hood, the faintest outline of a smirk curling his lips. His voice came, smooth and controlled, as though he had all the time in the world. "You've made it this far," he said, his eyes glinting in the dim light. "But the game is far from over." A shiver ran down Sarah's spine. She didn't know who this man was, or rather, she didn't know if she was ready to face him. And yet, there was no escape. The trap had already been set, and they were all caught in it, with nowhere left to run. The wind howled outside, rattling the windows of the old cabin, but inside, the tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. Sarah leaned against the wall, her arms folded tightly across her chest. She had never felt so uncertain. She had been running for what felt like a lifetime, trying to escape a shadow that seemed to follow her no matter where she went. But here, in this cabin, she had found a temporary refuge, only to realize that it wasn't enough. The others were in the next room, talking in hushed voices. David, the one who had always been the calm in their chaotic group, now seemed on edge. His usual demeanor had cracked, and Sarah could see the strain in his eyes. He was trying to maintain control, but there was something in the air that made it clear they were running out of time. "How much longer do we have?" Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. David looked up from the table where he had been studying their maps. He didn't answer immediately, his eyes narrowing as he considered the question. They all knew the answer, but no one was brave enough to say it out loud. The danger was closing in, and every passing hour made it harder to escape. Sarah could feel the weight of the situation pressing on her chest, like a hand around her heart, tightening with every second. Across the room, Mark and Lena were talking in rapid, low voices. Sarah didn't need to hear the conversation to know it was about the same thing: finding a way out or deciding whether to fight back. Mark was all for taking a stand, but Lena seemed to think they were too far gone. She was always the pragmatic one, the realist who believed that survival came before ideals. "The longer we stay here, the worse it gets," Lena said, her voice clipped. She glanced over at Sarah, her gaze hardening as she spoke. "We should have left when we had the chance. Now, it's just a matter of how long we can hold out." "She's right," Mark chimed in, a stubborn fire in his eyes. "But if we don't start taking action now, we won't have any chance at all. We need to fight." The words felt too heavy in the air, as though they were more than just a plan. They were a reckoning. Sarah's stomach churned at the thought. She had always believed that there was a way out, that they could avoid confrontation. But now it seemed impossible. As the night drew on, a creeping unease began to settle over the group. They all knew they had to make a decision, but none of them were ready. Each of them carried a secret fear, something they hadn't shared with the others. For Sarah, it was the fear of losing control, of succumbing to the darkness that had been following them from the start. For David, it was the fear that his leadership might not be enough to guide them through the storm. For Mark, it was his reckless desire to prove himself, to show that he could handle the situation even if it meant risking everything. And Lena? She had always been the pragmatist, but Sarah could see the cracks in her armor now. She wasn't as certain as she appeared. A sudden knock at the door jolted them all out of their thoughts, and every muscle in Sarah's body tensed. Her heart pounded in her chest. Who could it be? Were they already here? David moved cautiously toward the door, his hand trembling as he reached for the handle. He hesitated, glancing back at the others, but there was no time to waste. Slowly, he opened it. Outside stood a figure, tall, hooded, and silent. Sarah's breath caught in her throat as she recognized the silhouette. It was the one they had been running from, the one who had haunted their every step, the enemy. "Are you ready to face the consequences of your actions?" The voice came through the darkness, low and cold, like the wind that howled outside. The others stiffened, exchanging nervous glances. Sarah felt her stomach drop. It wasn't over. It was just beginning. The figure in the doorway stepped forward, and the others instinctively took a step back. The chill in the air seemed to deepen, the tension growing thicker, like something suffocating them. Sarah's pulse raced in her ears as she tried to keep her focus. She had to stay calm. They all had to stay calm, but it was hard with the way his presence filled the room, like an impending storm. David stood motionless, his hands still on the doorframe. The figure didn't move any closer, but there was a chilling sense of inevitability in the air. Sarah could feel her heartbeat in her throat, her hands trembling at her sides. She wanted to speak, to ask him what he wanted, but the words stuck in her throat. The man in the doorway tilted his head slightly, as though studying them, his gaze flicking from one face to the next. There was something calculating about him, a cold precision in every movement. He didn't need to say anything more. They knew who he was. "I know what you're thinking," the man said, his voice smooth, too calm. "You're wondering why you haven't been dealt with already. The truth is, I've been waiting for the right moment." Mark stepped forward, his voice tight with anger. "You think we're just going to let you walk in here like you own the place? We're not afraid of you." The figure's lips curled into a smile, but it wasn't a smile of warmth. It was the kind that sent a shiver down Sarah's spine. He didn't respond immediately, letting the silence stretch out until it was unbearable. "No," he finally said, his voice dropping into a whisper. "You're not afraid, but you should be." A silence followed, thick and oppressive. The weight of his words sank into the group like a stone dropping into water. Each of them, though they wouldn't admit it, could feel the fear creeping up from the pit of their stomachs. They didn't know exactly what he meant, but it didn't matter. They could feel the darkness surrounding them, closing in tighter with every passing second. David didn't budge. He met the man's gaze head-on, his posture rigid, but his face betrayed the uncertainty beneath. Sarah noticed the subtle shake in his hands. He was trying to hide it, but she saw it all the same. "You're not here for a conversation," Lena said, her voice cutting through the tension. She looked the man squarely in the eye, though Sarah could see the fear flickering behind her words. "So why don't you just get to it? We know what's coming." The man laughed softly, a low, chilling sound. "You think you understand the situation. I'm afraid you've underestimated it. You think this is just about a few files. About some misplaced data. This is much bigger than any of you could imagine." Sarah felt the ground beneath her shift, as though the reality they had known was beginning to splinter and crack. The pieces of the puzzle that had once seemed separate, fragments of secrets, lies, and half-truths, were slowly starting to click together in a way that terrified her. They were in deeper than they realized. This wasn't just a matter of survival anymore. This was something much darker, something that stretched far beyond them, beyond anything they had ever known. Mark stepped forward again, his chest rising and falling with each breath, as though trying to contain the storm inside him. "You think you can scare us with your cryptic threats? We're not backing down." "Maybe not," the man said with a flick of his hand. "But you don't get to decide that. The decision has already been made." He took a step toward them, and the air in the room seemed to thicken, as though the weight of his words had a physical presence. Sarah instinctively backed up a few steps, her mind racing, her thoughts a jumble of fear and confusion. What did he mean? What decision? And who had made it? The man raised a hand, motioning for them to be quiet. "Enough games," he said, his tone turning darker, more threatening. "You've crossed a line, and now you'll face the consequences." There was a sudden shift in the atmosphere, like the calm before a storm. Sarah could feel the air growing heavier with each passing second. The silence felt suffocating, but at the same time, it seemed to draw them all in. Every breath felt like it might be their last. The man's presence was a constant pressure against them, but they couldn't move, couldn't escape. David finally spoke, his voice steady, but with an edge of desperation. "What do you want from us? You've made your threats. You've shown us what you can do. But you're still here, and we're still standing." The man's eyes glinted with something that made Sarah's stomach churn. It was like a predator sizing up its prey. "I don't want anything from you," he said. "I want everything. You have no idea what you've gotten involved in. This is bigger than your petty survival. You're all just pieces in a game, and the only question now is whether you'll play along or get crushed." The words hit them all like a hammer. Sarah could feel her breath catch in her chest. Pieces in a game. Crushed. It was all becoming too much, too overwhelming. But then something changed in her. Maybe it was the realization that they couldn't keep hiding. Maybe it was the knowledge that they were already trapped, whether they wanted to face it or not. She wasn't sure, but she felt a surge of determination, of defiance. They had to face this, whatever it was. If they didn't, they would die on their knees. "What do we do now?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. David looked at her, his gaze locked with hers. There was fear in his eyes, but also something else, something like resolve. "We fight," he said, his voice steady despite everything. "We fight, or we die trying." The words hung in the air for a moment, as though the entire world had stopped. Sarah could feel the weight of the decision pressing on her. There was no turning back now. The man in the doorway, the danger, the secrets, they were all too close. They had reached the point of no return. The figure's smile widened, as though he had been waiting for this. He stepped closer, his eyes narrowing. "Very well," he said, his voice cold as ice. "Let's see how far you'll go." And in that moment, Sarah knew that nothing would be the same again. The man stepped fully into the room, his cold eyes glinting in the dim light. The air felt charged, like a storm was about to break. Sarah's pulse thundered in her ears, and her throat tightened with the weight of everything that had led up to this moment. But just as she thought things couldn't get worse, something shifted. From the corner of the room, a low, mechanical hum began. It was faint at first, almost imperceptible, but it quickly grew louder, like the sound of distant thunder creeping closer. Everyone froze. Even the figure in the doorway paused, his eyes narrowing, seemingly caught off guard. "What is that?" Lena's voice was barely a whisper, but it carried an edge of panic. Mark stepped toward the window, his eyes scanning the outside world, but nothing was there. No sign of any new danger. The humming continued to grow, louder, more insistent, like an engine winding up. It wasn't coming from outside. It was coming from somewhere deeper within the cabin, somewhere beneath their feet. Sarah felt a strange sense of unease crawl up her spine. She didn't like it. She didn't like how it felt like the walls were closing in from all sides. Before anyone could say another word, the floor beneath them shuddered. The vibration was subtle at first, a slight tremor, but then it intensified. It wasn't an earthquake. There was a deliberate force behind it, a calculated motion. The hum turned into a harsh, mechanical whine, like something ancient was waking up, and Sarah felt her breath catch in her chest. David's eyes widened, a flicker of realization crossing his face. "It's not just us," he muttered, almost to himself. "They've been planning this from the start." The man in the doorway stepped back, his eyes now darting around the room. For a moment, he looked vulnerable, almost as if he hadn't expected the shift. Sarah took a step forward, feeling an unexplainable surge of adrenaline. Whatever was happening, they had to get to the bottom of it. The hum turned into a roar. The entire cabin seemed to tremble now, as if the foundation itself were coming apart. Sarah felt the floor beneath her feet sway, and instinctively, she reached out to steady herself against the wall. "Everyone move." David's voice cut through the panic, sharp and commanding. "Get to the back." But as the group began to scramble toward the rear of the cabin, Sarah's eyes caught something that sent a cold wave of dread over her. From the farthest corner of the room, hidden behind a stack of crates, a faint light flickered, and then it grew brighter. It wasn't just a light. It was a screen coming to life, displaying a string of cryptic codes, numbers running in rapid succession. "What the hell is that?" Mark breathed, his voice shaking with disbelief. Sarah's heart skipped a beat. "It's a command center," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "But how? Why is it here?" The hum suddenly stopped. Silence. Then the screen flickered again, and a voice came through, sharp and distorted, echoing through the room. "You think you've been running from me," the voice rasped, almost mocking. "But the truth is, you've been running from yourselves." Sarah's stomach dropped. She looked around at the others, but no one spoke. They all felt it. The air felt different now, as though they had crossed some unseen threshold. They were no longer just being hunted. They were part of something bigger, something much darker. The voice continued, the distorted sound making it harder to understand. "I've been watching you since the beginning. You think you stumbled upon something dangerous? You think you were the ones pulling the strings? No, the game has always been mine." There was a pause, the air thick with anticipation, and then the voice spoke again, but this time it was clearer, more direct. "You thought you had no choice but to take those files, to expose the truth. But you were never meant to win. You were always meant to lose." The room went cold. A shiver ran down Sarah's spine as the full weight of the words hit her. They had thought they were acting out of desperation. They had believed they were making choices for their own survival. But now it felt like they had been manipulated from the start. They had been mere pawns in a game they didn't even fully understand. A sharp noise, like a metal door sliding open, pierced the silence. The cabin's floor creaked as if it were giving way. Slowly, Sarah turned toward the back of the room where a hidden trapdoor had just revealed itself, its edges illuminated by the faint glow of the screen. "No," Lena whispered. "No way." David stepped forward, his face set with a grim determination. "This is it. We need to move. Now." But Sarah couldn't tear her gaze away from the trapdoor. It was as if it were calling to her, pulling her in with an invisible force. She glanced back at the others, but no one moved. They were all frozen, caught in the same tangled web of fear and disbelief. "Stay close," David said, his voice low. But as he moved to the trapdoor, Sarah noticed something that made her heart stop. It wasn't just the voice or the trapdoor. It was the faint, flickering image on the screen, the silhouette of a person. It wasn't the man who had been standing in the doorway. A second figure had appeared. A figure Sarah recognized. Her breath caught in her throat as the truth hit her all at once, like a blow to the chest. It was someone she hadn't seen in years. Someone she thought was dead. Anna. Sarah's voice trembled, barely audible, as she looked at the screen. The woman on the screen was older now, but the features were unmistakable. Her sister. And with that revelation, everything shattered. All the secrets, all the lies, all the running, they weren't just about survival. This was personal. "Move, Sarah." Mark's voice broke through her shock, but she couldn't tear her eyes away from the screen. This wasn't just a game anymore. This wasn't about files or data. This was about something much deeper, something that went all the way back to the beginning. As the trapdoor creaked open, the ground beneath them seemed to fall away, and Sarah knew they were about to be pulled into something much darker than they had ever imagined. But the truth, the full horrible truth, was still waiting for them. The trapdoor creaked open, revealing a dark, narrow staircase that spiraled downward into the unknown. The sudden chill that radiated from the darkness sent a shiver through Sarah's body. But she couldn't turn away. Not now. Not after seeing Anna's face on that screen. It felt like the entire world had tilted on its axis, and she had no choice but to follow it wherever it led. David was the first to descend, his movements quick, but with purpose. He knew they had no time to waste. The others followed in a tense, quiet line, each one grappling with the weight of their own thoughts. Lena kept glancing over her shoulder, as though expecting someone, to emerge from the shadows. Mark was silent, his fists clenched, jaw set. And Sarah, though her mind raced, could barely comprehend the turmoil inside her. Anna, her sister. What did this mean? As they descended into the darkness, the hum of machinery echoed from below, a low, almost soothing sound that did nothing to ease the tension in Sarah's chest. She couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking into a trap that had been set long before they ever knew. At the bottom of the staircase, the room stretched out before them like some kind of underground bunker. The walls were lined with monitors and equipment, flashing screens that revealed maps, codes, and images of people, strangers, allies, enemies, all jumbled together in an incomprehensible mess. But there, on the far side of the room, seated at a large console, was Anna. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. She couldn't move, could barely think. Anna, alive. But she wasn't the same. She looked different, hardened, colder, like someone who had been through far too much. She wasn't the sister Sarah remembered. She was a stranger now, sitting in the control center of something far more dangerous than anything Sarah had imagined. "You shouldn't have come." Anna's voice was flat, emotionless, as though they were strangers meeting in passing. There was no recognition in her eyes, no sign of the sister Sarah once knew. She was just another player in the game now, and Sarah, like the others, was nothing more than a pawn. "What the hell is this?" Mark's voice trembled, barely containing his anger. "What have you done?" Anna didn't flinch. She didn't even look up from the console. "I didn't do anything," she replied calmly. "I've been waiting for you to figure it out." David stepped forward, his expression grim. "We're done running. What is all this? Who are you working for? For the first time, Anna looked directly at them, her eyes cold, distant. I'm not working for anyone. I never was. The truth is, you were never supposed to know any of this. The words struck Sarah like a blow to the chest. What do you mean? Anna, what happened to you? We were supposed to be together. We were supposed to fix this. Anna's lips curled into a thin, emotionless smile. You were always too naive. You thought you were in control, but you weren't. None of you were. You walked right into my plan. I'm the one who set the pieces in motion. All of it, from the beginning. The shock of the words was like a punch to the gut. Sarah's world tilted again, and for a moment, she couldn't process what she was hearing. Everything, the files, the chase, the danger. It was all part of something much bigger. Anna had been pulling the strings all along. No, you can't be serious, Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible. You used us. You used me. Anna's gaze softened, just for a moment, but it was quickly replaced by a hard, calculating look. I didn't use you. I gave you a choice. You just didn't see it. You were always part of this, but you had to figure it out on your own. Mark took a step forward, his voice thick with disbelief. How? How could you do this? We were family. We are family, Anna replied coolly. But you never understood. The world's not black and white. The things we thought we were fighting for. They don't matter. None of it matters. She stood up from the console, stepping toward them slowly, her movements controlled and precise. You think you're here to stop me, to take everything back. But you're wrong. It's already done. David's voice broke through the silence, hard and determined. What do you mean, it's done? Anna gave a short, bitter laugh. I mean the files don't matter anymore. The game has already moved on. The moment you stumbled onto that data, you became part of a much larger plan. One that's already in motion. You were never meant to stop it. You were just the distraction. Sarah's heart pounded in her chest. What plan? She demanded. What have you done? Anna's eyes gleamed with something darker now. I've set things in motion that no one can stop. The power shift, the leverage, it's all in place. The real game was never about those files, or your survival. It's about control. And I have it. Suddenly, the room plunged into darkness. The monitors went black, the humming ceased. For a long moment, there was only silence. Then a sound, distant at first, but growing louder, like the roar of 1,000 engines. It was the sound of something huge, something massive, moving, and it sent a wave of panic through the group. The floor trembled again, stronger this time, and the walls seemed to close in around them. The sound was coming from somewhere deep beneath the bunker, from somewhere far beyond the cabin. No, David whispered, his voice cracking with disbelief. You didn't. But Anna didn't answer. She just stood there, watching them, her face unreadable. And then it hit them. The realization, the twist, the final betrayal. The bunker wasn't just a hideout. It was a launch site, a command center for something far greater. Sarah's mind raced, piecing the fragments together. The hum, the machinery, the screens. It was all part of something global, something that had been orchestrated behind the scenes. They hadn't just been running from a few files. They had been running from the beginning of a revolution, the start of something that would change everything. Before anyone could react, the walls shuddered once more, and the sound intensified, a deafening roar that seemed to swallow everything around them. And in that moment, the final twist revealed itself. The files they had stolen weren't about exposing secrets. They were the key to unlocking the very thing Anna had been working toward. The game wasn't over. It had only just begun. The rumble beneath their feet grew louder, the sound vibrating through the very bones of the bunker. For a split second, it felt like everything would collapse in on them, that the walls, the ceiling, and the floor would all cave into the depths below. But then, something shifted. The roar quieted, and the machinery around them hummed back to life. Anna's expression remained unreadable as she watched the chaos unfold. There was no trace of guilt, no remorse, just cold, calculating resolve. Sarah felt a surge of anger, but beneath that, a deeper, heavier emotion: betrayal. The sister she had once known had become something else entirely. "Anna, stop," Sarah said, her voice breaking through the tense silence. "You don't have to do this. You are one of us. This isn't who you are." For a moment, Anna's gaze flickered, just the slightest hesitation, but it was gone in an instant. She shook her head, her lips curling into a thin smile. "You still don't understand, do you? This isn't about who I am. This is about what needs to happen, what's already in motion." David stepped forward, his jaw tight, his eyes burning with frustration. "What needs to happen? This destruction. The power you're trying to seize. It's not worth it, Anna. You can't just tear everything apart for some twisted ideal." Anna's smile faltered for a brief moment. "You're right. I can't," she said, her voice softening for the first time. "But I'm not the one who started it. I'm not the one pulling the strings. I'm just part of it." The tension in the room was suffocating, as if every word carried a weight too heavy to bear. Mark moved closer to the control panel, his hand trembling as he hovered over the keys, unsure of what to do, how to stop it. "I didn't want this," Anna said, her voice low, almost wistful. "But you were also eager to uncover the truth, to tear apart the systems, the lies. You didn't see the bigger picture. You didn't see what was already in place, what had already been set in motion before any of you even stepped foot in this cabin." "What bigger picture?" Sarah asked, barely holding back the tears that threatened to spill over. She was so tired, so confused. "Anna, we've been fighting for the truth, for justice. You can't just walk away from that. Not now, not after everything." For a long moment, Anna said nothing. Then finally she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "The truth? There's no such thing anymore. Not really. What you've been fighting for, it's all part of the plan. It always was." Sarah's head spun as she tried to process the words. Everything they had done, every choice they had made, every step they had taken, was it all in vain? Had they truly been pawns in a game they didn't understand? Before she could say another word, the screen in front of them flickered to life once again, flashing with a series of rapid-fire commands. The machinery around them hummed louder now, as if it was responding to some unseen force. The walls began to shift, revealing hidden doors and corridors that had been previously unseen. "What is that?" Mark said, his voice rising in alarm. "It's starting," Anna said, her eyes flicking to the monitors. "The countdown's already begun. There's no stopping it now." Suddenly, a new, sharper sound filled the room. A series of beeps, like an alarm, signaling the final phase of whatever had been set in motion. Sarah's heart raced in her chest as she turned to David, her mind spinning. They had to stop this. They had to find a way. "Anna," David said, his voice thick with urgency, "this isn't you. You have to help us. We can still fix this. You can still fix it. Don't let everything we've been through be for nothing." Anna's eyes met his, and for a split second, Sarah thought she saw a flicker of hesitation, but it was gone just as quickly as it had appeared. "I can't," Anna said, shaking her head. "You don't get it. You're too late." The countdown continued to tick down, the numbers flashing on the screen with increasing speed. The air around them felt charged, as if every second was pulling them closer to something they couldn't control. Sarah glanced at the others. They were all looking at Anna now, waiting, hoping, but there was no more time for hope. Whatever had been set in motion couldn't be undone, not now. But then, in a moment of clarity, something clicked inside Sarah. She couldn't give up. She couldn't just walk away from the fight, not after everything they'd been through. Not after seeing Anna again. With a swift motion, she reached for the console, pushing past Anna's cold gaze. The room seemed to freeze, and for a moment, time itself felt like it was suspended. She typed in the first command that came to her mind, her fingers moving quickly across the keys, not knowing whether it would work, but desperate to try. Desperate to stop the destruction. The monitors flickered again, the beeps of the countdown slowing. There was a pause, then the screen flashed a bright red warning. The countdown had stopped. For a moment, nothing happened. And then, with a deafening crash, the system began to shut down, the hum of machinery sputtering to a halt. The lights flickered, and the walls groaned under the weight of something immense being retracted. It was over. The room went still. No alarms, no countdown, no sound at all except for the pounding of their hearts. Sarah turned toward Anna, whose face was a mixture of disbelief and something else, something like regret. You did it," Anna whispered, her voice a mixture of awe and sorrow. "You stopped it. But it wasn't a victory. Not really. There would be no happy ending here. The world had been shaken by what they had uncovered, and now it was up to them to rebuild, to figure out how to move forward from this shattered place." As the last of the machinery powered down, the reality of what had just happened settled in. They had stopped the worst of it, but the battle for the truth, for justice, would never truly end. Anna, looking broken now, stepped back, her shoulders slumped as if the weight of everything had finally caught up with her. She glanced at Sarah, then at the others, as if seeing them for the first time. "I never meant for this to happen, but it was already too late." "We all make choices," Sarah said softly, her voice steady. "And sometimes, those choices lead us down roads we never intended to take, but we can still find our way back." Anna didn't reply. She simply nodded, her eyes distant, as if her part in the story had ended. Sarah turned to the others, the weight of the moment settling over her. They had made it through, but the world they knew would never be the same. There were still more battles ahead, more truths to uncover, but they would face them together. And for the first time in a long while, Sarah felt a glimmer of hope. A quiet understanding that no matter the darkness that lay ahead, they would keep fighting for what mattered. For the truth, for justice, and for each other.